Tomorrow, September 17th, is a big day. The FDA Advisory Committee meeting is discussing boosters. This is the topic that everyone's been a buzz about ever since the White House lit a fuse under the booster discussion. Now, you might remember a few months ago, it was Pfizer who announced that they're going to push forward with a booster. And they initially got some pushback from the CDC, from Fauci, from the White House, saying, whoa, we haven't seen any data that makes us consider boosters. Then, of course, there was a private meeting, and from that moment, the dominoes started to fall. The White House announced that they're going to have boosters by September 20th, and that the FDA, well, of course, it was pending the FDA's analysis to make sure it was safe and effective. And in response, two senior officials at the FDA, Marion Gruber and Philip Krause, have resigned. And here we are on the verge of the big event. And the guidance documents are up on the website. You can take a look. What do I think? I looked through the guidance documents, and what we're talking about is an unprecedented vaccination program, a third dose to tens of millions of Americans, older Americans, and the data that's being provided is that the antibody titers are a bit higher in a study. Now, antibody titers, of course, under some circumstances, have some predictive value, but under these circumstances, whether or not they actually mean these people are less likely to have severe disease is a big question mark. Now, of course, the company has offered some data, observational data from Israel. It's got a big problem. It's confounded. The people who got boosters are fundamentally different than the people who didn't get boosters. Not just that they got the booster, but also the types of people they are, their behavior, etc. That's revealed in the data set. They have a dramatic difference in SARS-CoV-2 rates on day 1 after the booster, which is a little too fast for a booster to work. So that's confounding. But whether or not there's an effect is a big question mark. But the FDA has said that they have not reviewed that observational data. That data is not part of their consideration. They're really just considering this based on the antibody data. So we are on a precipice. There is the vote at the end of the day tomorrow, and they're going to ask whether or not these data support. The word they're using in the draft guidance is approval. I suspect they mean authorization. But do they mean approval? I have some questions about that. But this is going to be a vote about whether or not these data are sufficient to allow boosters. Now, of course, the White House has put tremendous political pressure on making this happen. And of course, I've said over and over again, the data are not sufficient in my mind. What would be sufficient data? All I want to see is you take 1,000 people over the age of 60, you randomize them to booster or no booster, and you show me they're better off, that they are less likely to get severely ill with SARS-CoV-2. I'm not necessarily sure that I'll be satisfied if you show me they're less likely to test positive for SARS-CoV-2. Because I do believe at this point it is a matter of time before everybody on Earth eventually gets SARS-CoV-2 in our noses. The question is, are we going to get very sick from it, or are we merely going to get it and clear it, which is the purpose of vaccination? And so if we don't do this, what might happen? Well, of course, things might go swimmingly. The booster might come out, it might go well, people might be slightly more protected. It'll be difficult to see that against what would have happened in the world without boosters because it'll be kind of a modest effect size. And things will just keep going forward. What might also happen, there might be a bunch of adverse events you don't expect, like myocarditis, like something else. And those events might have some time before they get caught in our passive surveillance systems. So that might be another consequence. But I think the real challenge will be, what will be the level of evidence required for the next dose? Why will the company stop with 3? They'll go to 4 and go to 5 and go to yearly. And they'll say, every time we give a dose, the antibody titer is higher, and so you should grant approval. But that will lead to a system where we end up with lots of doses and a lot of uncertainty as to whether or not people are better off. I think now is the moment to draw a line in the scientific sand and say, we're not going to get this approval through unless you prove to me people live longer, live better, or that somehow the global pandemic is better off by having this booster policy. And I think the last thing is almost so difficult to prove you can't even prove it. You're better off focusing on the individual benefit. You can't really prove that the transmission is going to be different because the counterfactual is quite hard to capture, measure, and document. So I think we're best off focusing on severe disease and hospitalization. And what I see to date in this packet, it's flimsy. And I feel a grave concern when political decisions lead to regulatory decisions. The fact that 2 FDA officials have resigned who've had long terms at the FDA, we're talking decades, this should give us all pause. So this is the moment that many of us were worried about would happen under the prior administration, that there would be a push to use low levels of evidence for a mass vaccine campaign. but it is in this moment. It is in this administration. And so we shall see what the vote comes out as. I've got concerns about this whole process. It is not satisfying to me. And the last thing I would say is, well, some people might say that this just makes it an option for people. You don't have to do it if you don't want to do it. It's just an option, and you can weigh the risks and benefits with your doctor. And to that, I would say, Americans aren't good with options. We either don't have it as an option or we mandate it. We saw already in LA County that 12 to 15-year-olds under the auspices of an EUA are getting mandated 2 doses or you can't come to school. We're going to have widespread mandates, I think, in healthcare settings. We're going to have mandates in other settings, perhaps even manufacturers, perhaps some of these tech companies are going to mandate it. Who knows where the mandates will start and when they'll stop. And that, to me, is the difficulty in America. We are not comfortable in that space of it's an option. It's going to move from the data's insufficient to it's a mandate, and I worry about that. That's not the greatest place for policy. So here we are, the day before the vote. I will come back and tell you my thoughts afterwards, but I'm hoping they do the right thing.